Tech billionaires have had a noticeable presence in US politics recently. Some are now even practically running the government. But there's something else you should know about, a project many of them are investing in to create alternative models of governance that could have massive implications around the world. It's got a lot of names, but the idea is the same.
Free private cities,
charter cities,
startup societies,
zones of progress.
What I'm really calling for is something like tech Zionism.
Yeah, we'll come back to that last one in a bit. The idea is to create free market enclaves with their own rules and laws. But is this really a way to jumpstart innovation and bring prosperity to developing countries as its proponents claim? Or is it just another scheme for the wealthy to skirt regulations and taxes and get even richer? Billionaire tech powerhouses like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk champion these kinds of cities, as do others in President Donald Trump's inner circle. Trump even campaigned on building privatized cities on US federal land.
These freedom cities will reopen the frontier.
There are many of these kinds of semi-autonomous cities around the world, and in late 2023, I visited the most controversial one here on this small Honduran island. It's called Próspera.
Próspera is building the future of human governance, privately run and for profit.
If the people of the world do not like their governments, welcome here.
Companies based in Próspera pay low taxes and can create their own regulatory frameworks. And that's why it's become a hub for experimental medical procedures not approved by the US Food and Drug Administration.
I came to Honduras with the intention of editing and altering my genetic makeup.
I've gotten in the habit of getting crazy medical treatments that are only available in Próspera.
I also recently got myself like an implant into my hand here. You can program several things into it, like opening a Tesla car.
This is the type of person we exist to attract, right? Someone who's trying to do good in the world. That is very hard to do because of regulatory roadblocks.
Próspera has raised over $150 million in investments. And some of the names behind that funding are prominent US billionaires and Trump backers. PayPal founder Peter Thiel, venture capitalist Mark Andreessen, and OpenAI's Sam Altman. Crypto company Coinbase has also invested. But this so-called libertarian crypto-utopia has generated major backlash. Many Hondurans see Próspera's ability to incorporate land and create its own laws as a threat to the country's sovereignty.
This is like a new form of colonization. It's unfair for foreigners to come to Honduras and build and do whatever they want.
Even though previous Honduran leaders cleared the way for these private cities, the current one has impeded their development and is trying to fully dismantle them. In response, Próspera's mostly American investors are suing Honduras for, get this, almost $11 billion. That's nearly 2/3 of its national budget. How is it not exploitative for mostly American investors to come after such a poor country like Honduras for almost $11 billion?
They're not coming after a poor country. They're coming here to invest, to create jobs.
Since I visited, Próspera's legal future continues to hang in the balance. But here's the thing. What I learned about the fight brewing over this one private city in Honduras gives us a lot of insight into the future of private governance around the world and how local communities could be affected. This is a very simple village, and you're up against this multi-million-dollar project.
It's not fair.
The movement to build privatized cities like Próspera boils down to this idea. What if you could create a city that you run like a business?
Imagine a system in which a private company offers you protection of life, liberty, and property.
Because a startup society is small, it can experiment. You're not a taxpayer, you're a customer.
Around 15 years ago, private city proponents set their eyes on Honduras, one of the poorest countries in Latin America. It had recently undergone a coup that ousted a left-wing president. The new right-wing administration was looking to bring in foreign capital. So in 2013, it passed into law Honduras's version of private cities. They're known as ZEDEs. That's the Spanish acronym for Zones for Employment and Economic Development. 3 ZEDEs were established in Honduras, and the crown jewel is Próspera, here on this touristy island of Roatan. So in late 2023, I went to check it out. Okay, so we're on our way to what is perhaps the most controversial private city experiment on the planet, and I have a temporary visa on my phone just to get in. Only around 100 people permanently live in Próspera today, and most of them are Honduran. Another 400 people, mostly foreigners, are e-residents. That means they're able to own property and operate a business in Próspera, but they don't live here full-time. So we made it into Próspera. We passed the private security and the gate over there, and I'm about to meet Jorge Colindres, who's basically the mayor here.
Hi, hello.
How are you leaving?
Welcome to my city.
Jorge is a Honduran attorney. He's also Próspera's technical secretary, which means he runs the place and oversees around 200 companies here.
There's a software company, there's a scuba shop, a Bitcoin center, and there's a bunch of small businesses that are employing people.
Since I was there, more companies have set up shop, including some medical startups doing stuff like this.
Vitalia was intended to be heavily focused on biotech longevity. Let's make that optional.
A notable client is American biohacker Brian Johnson, who made hundreds of millions of dollars when he sold his company Venmo in 2013. He recently went to Próspera to undergo gene therapy, which he claims will help him live longer, and he made this video.
I'm traveling to a remote island for an extreme medical procedure that could change the future of humanity. This is a journey in search of the fountain of youth.
Do they come here because they're not as regulated and they can sort of push the envelope in terms of the science that they're doing?
Actually, the companies, they are very highly regulated, but...
By who?
They have regulatory choice. So essentially we have a list of 31 countries. And so people can come here and opt to operate in Próspera City under the regulation they choose.
When I asked who ensures the companies are complying with the regulations they choose, he told me Próspera's governing body, with the help of an auditor that Próspera selects. It's pretty clear how a choose-your-own regulation scheme and low taxes can be a big draw for wealthy foreigners. But Jorge insists he's interested in helping his fellow Hondurans, 2/3 of whom live in poverty.
In one generation, I want to leave the country out of poverty. I cannot do it with crazy socialist politicians. We cannot do it like that. Now I have a zone where I can help in the adoption of rules that create opportunity.
How does the investment and the wealth that's generated from mostly American and foreign investors, how does that trickle down to the people of Honduras?
Well, I'm not sure I would call it trickle down, but let's say this is capital that is put to work here. And this capital here creates jobs. This capital creates investment opportunities for Honduran entrepreneurs.
So far, though, most of the hundreds of jobs that Próspera has created for Hondurans are in the construction or service sectors. And while Jorge says wages are on average higher in Próspera than in the rest of Honduras, critics ask at what cost? Because what's perhaps most radical about Próspera is that it has its own government, its own labor laws, private police, even its own voting process. And in Próspera, the more land you own, the more votes you get for 2 of the 9 council seats.
Honduras no se vende.
And all that has been incredibly controversial in Honduras. The current president, Democratic Socialist Xiomara Castro, campaigned on abolishing the Zede law. She won in a decisive victory.
Estamos convencidas que para generar trabajo en nuestro país no necesitamos vender nuestra soberanía.
How do you respond to the criticism that this sort of DIY government is a direct threat to the sovereignty of Honduras?
Próspera was made for Honduras. It was the decision of Honduras to create Próspera.
The criticism is that this is a lot of foreign investors who aren't even Honduran,
Great.
exercising their own sovereignty within a country that already has its own laws.
If we're talking about sovereignty, we should be able to innovate. We should be able to offer new systems of how to cooperate and live together.
But for many, this experiment harkens back to a dark chapter in Honduras' history, when the country was exploited by foreign corporate powers for its resources.
The whole north coast of Honduras was banana country, the greatest producing area in the world.
At the start of the 20th century, American banana companies took over large swaths of Honduran land and turned them into private company towns. Honduras gave them tax breaks and access to resources in exchange for the promise of jobs and development. But instead, these company towns offered low wages and unsafe working conditions and became rife with exploitation. The companies also had massive power in the region. One U.S. banana magnate even helped orchestrate 2 coups in an effort to install presidents friendly to his bottom line. Many I spoke to in Roatan had strong opinions on this new iteration of private cities. ¿Qué piensas sobre las sedes?
Las sedes no es algo para nosotros los pobres, es para los ricos.
Son para personas privilegiadas que tienen dinero. Y la gente pobre que vive acá
Viven en la miseria.
Lo que menos queremos es que el país de nosotros sea vendido peormente por pedacitos.
Other critics I spoke with say many Hondurans see through Próspera's lofty claims, like Fernando Garcia, who's the presidential commissioner against the ZEDEs.
Personalmente digo de que sus apreciaciones, que son inversionistas, que quieren el desarrollo, es un verso muy bonito. Son los neocolonizadores que quieren desprender grandes franjas de territorio nacional para constituir sus propios estados.
Critics also worry about how much land might be in question. So far, more than 1,000 acres have been incorporated into Próspera. It's land Próspera legally incorporated, but get this, Próspera is allowed to incorporate land anywhere. It doesn't even have to share borders. So this is Próspera, and way over here, this is Próspera too, and down here on the mainland is also Próspera.
No vamos a permitir que Honduras se venda a destajo, que si fuera una vaca, y aquí va un muslo, aquí va el tronco, y aquí va la cabeza.
So what does it mean when all that land becomes part of Próspera? Well, companies and individuals within Próspera pay an extremely low tax rate to the federal government, and they don't pay any taxes to the local government, even though they use Roatan's municipal services. And companies there also play by their own rules. This luxury residential tower within Próspera is almost 2 times higher than what the local Roatan code allows.
Ellos no les interesa el desarrollo económico del país. Ellos lo que quieren es, por un lado, acumulación de riqueza, pero más que todo, darle vigencia a su teoría de que los estados no deben existir.
And Honduras isn't the only place where this theory is being tried out. Dozens of these kinds of private cities have been in development over the years, often in poor countries like Zambia and Papua New Guinea. There are also plans to develop a private city just north of San Francisco, as well as a crypto state in the Mediterranean, both backed by tech billionaires. And of course, these private city enthusiasts now have a friend in the White House.
We should hold a contest to charter up to 10 new cities.
In fact, Próspera representatives working under an advocacy group called the Freedom Cities Coalition have begun meeting with the Trump administration. They're pushing to create similar cities that operate outside of regulations on U.S. federal land. Trump's circle is filled with private city proponents, like Próspera backer Mark Andreessen, who has been working with Trump's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. There's also Stephen Moore, Trump's former economic advisor, who went on to help write Project 2025. That's the ultra-conservative government blueprint that aims to slash federal spending. And while researching, I came across some pretty interesting takes on private cities. Listen to what this tech investor said about his dream for the movement's future.
You know, what I'm really calling for is something like tech Zionism.
Zionism, the movement that led to the creation of Israel at the expense of the native Palestinian population that was already living there. And then listen to how he praised the founder of Zionism, Theodor Herzl.
Theodor Herzl was like a tech founder, okay?
Okay. Side note, some people are even connecting the dots and wondering, when Trump talks about ethnically cleansing Gaza and turning it into
the Riviera of the Middle East,
does he mean a private city? For now, let's get back to the private city we can examine closely, Próspera. I wanted to ask Jorge if an exclusionary mindset has taken root there. After all, an early architect of Honduras' ZEDEs said, ZEDEs will reserve the right not to accept serious criminals, communists, and Islamists.
That's not in our rules, and it's forbidden by the ZEDE framework. We cannot adopt discrimination policies based on race or religion or things like that.
But you can restrict certain countries.
There's, I think, a list of sanctioned countries.
What are they?
I think Iran, there are some restrictions on Nicaragua, some restrictions on Russia. It's a security thing, and we believe that the free world has enemies. We believe that there are countries, rogue countries, that are trying to disrupt democratic procedures. So we look closely on applicants from these countries.
Do you think the forces of the free market support people's rights and democracy?
Of course, there's impossible to exercise human rights without a free market.
Eso no es democracia. En la democracia todos valemos igual. En este caso, valen según lo que tienen. Los que tienen capacidad de producir son los que valen y el resto son totalmente desechables y descartables. If we just walked along this beach, we would get to Próspera, right? We'd be at.
This is Próspera.
Oh, this is it?
Yeah, this is part of Próspera, all of this.
This is Vanessa Cardenas. She's the vice president of the community board of Crawfish Rock, a small fishing community of 600 people who have been divided over Próspera. So when you're driving and you see this high-rise tower, the Dena residences, what do you think? What do you feel?
Well, more than anything out there, trouble, I would say. They're saying it's prosperity, for us it's not.
This view of the Dena Tower is a 5-minute walk from her home. It's a stark symbol of what happens when companies inside Próspera can play by their own rules. A 2-bedroom apartment here is going for almost $200,000 US, far out of reach for those who already live in the area.
And when I see that, I'm just seeing that expanding all over. They will not left us here, as well as our little huts. Our way of life, we just won't fit, not with that image.
Vanessa has been at the forefront of the fight against Próspera. Her family has lived in Crawfish Rock for 5 generations, and she spent the last few years sounding the alarm about this project.
Say that Próspera has had a very negative impact on our community.
58 acres of Crawfish Rock is now legally part of Próspera as incorporated land. Villagers like Vanessa are worried that Próspera's influence will entice other landowners to give up their land.
Whatever land we have is ours, it's our inheritance. We're scared that they come and take away what we have.
How far are you willing to go to defend Crawfish Rock?
As far as we have to go. Because this is our home. We have nowhere else to go.
At the same time, many of her neighbors have decided to work within Próspera. After all, Próspera was hiring during the pandemic when other places weren't. And as many told me, work is work. Would you say most people here are supportive of Próspera or against it?
Some are against it and some with it. They're putting food on a lot of people's table because people got work.
So I'm walking around the village and asking folks about their thoughts on Próspera, and I just spoke to one young man who didn't want to appear on camera for fear of his safety or retaliation. But he told me he was working at Próspera 2 months ago and he did not get paid well. The general sentiment from him and others we've spoken to is that they want them gone. 2 months after we got back from Honduras, I connected with Vanessa over Zoom after she sent us this photo. She said someone from her village in favor of Próspera assaulted her at a meeting about the Zede law. She also said she believes Próspera is fomenting tensions in the community and claimed to have a target on her back. Do you feel like the situation for your own safety is getting more and more dangerous?
Yes, the resistance is here for a reason, because we knew from the beginning that we were going to lose our home. Whether it's today, whether it's tomorrow, they're going to move us.
When I asked Jorge about this, he wrote back saying he believes Vanessa plays victim and is leading a government-sponsored campaign against the Zedes. So what's next for Próspera? Well, for now, it continues to operate, and that $11 billion lawsuit that investors filed against Honduras is ongoing in an international tribunal. Meanwhile, Honduras is holding presidential elections in 2025, and Zede proponents are hoping for Castro's party to lose. But even if the Zedes do come to an end, it's likely their ideas will live on. In fact, Próspera recently announced it's launching in Africa. Why should people around the world care about what's playing out here in Honduras?
They should care more than anything because it's the rich taking from the poor, and it just doesn't seem right for Americans to come to threaten us in taking what little we have. And they may say whatever they want, but that threat is real.